What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to the TDR Devy podcast. We're talking a little 2025 rookie mock draft today, but with landing spots. So we did a PFF mock, and we had everything kind of 7 rounds. We mocked all the way through it. Not great landing spots. That's the fun part about it. And then why we talk about the landing spots before we go through our mock draft, our 2-round mock draft we did, I thought it would be important, and Jay did a great job of this, of looking at the dynasty landscape, looking forward, like, hey, what is coming up with the quarterbacks in each position, and looking and seeing, hey, what do we got to get ahead of? Who's probably going to be drafting these guys? Who do we like the best in these spots? Just so it's a little bit different, just a random mock that we just do 2 rounds of. We talk about, we get clicks, and that's it. We want to kind of provide context a little bit more in detail there for you guys and talk about kind of what's coming next in the dynasty landscape. All right, so let's get into the 2025 quarterback landscape. Let's go through it. Jay wrote it down, and we'll kind of talk about it. Open spots right now. Giants have a glaring need for a quarterback, and the Raiders. Those 2 spots I feel like are the probably the 2 teams that are locked into a quarterback at some point. Free agency, whatever's going on there. The Browns, also a big question mark there. Jets, is Rodgers gone? It looks like that tenure is coming to an end. The Titans, will they move on from Levis or not? I think that's a big question mark. They're definitely bringing someone in, and that's something to kind of note as well. Must consider, Bryce's look better for the Panthers, but what are they doing there? Saints with Carr, I mean, that's been kind of a cluster. Rams, is Stafford going to retire? Is he coming back? Steelers look pretty locked in, but like, what is those contracts going to look like? And in Colts, like, they won today against the Patriots, but, you know, it wasn't all perfect there for Anthony Richardson. We saw he got benched there. So what's your biggest takeaway about this quarterback landscape in a nutshell?
I think we have 2 teams that are definitely going to select a quarterback in the first round. I think that's great for fantasy purposes. I think they'll probably be starting those quarterbacks too next year. I mean, maybe you have like an Aiden O'Connell that's like a bridge for a couple weeks into the next season. But the quarterbacks that are going to be at the very top of this draft are, experienced quarterbacks. So they'll probably be those guys that will probably be wanting to start, especially if we're going to select them with very, very high first round picks. So I think those two are locked in. Unfortunately, this is not a great QB class. We're going to probably get into that in a little bit, but the Browns probably need a QB at some point. I mean, everybody really likes what Jameis Winston's done coming in, and they still have this lingering Deshaun Watson deal, and I'm not sure how they get out of that or what they do with that. But that is probably a place where you'll see a lot of like pundits drafting quarterbacks to the Browns. I'm not sure that's the way that they go. They may decide to roll with Winston for another year and hit other positions of need and maybe hit that quarterback next year, which I think if we get some decent guys to come out that year, that might be a better year to grab quarterbacks from. And then, with clearly things have imploded there for the Jets with Aaron Rodgers. So we'll see how that turns out. But there are definitely, what we don't know right now is what the free agent landscape will look like. Our quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, Aaron Rodgers, sort of those veteran guys moving around at all and taking one of these spots. And will one of the teams want to try and shore up that position with a veteran instead of going for one of these rookies? I think that's pretty interesting. But I do see those 2 as sort of locks. Bryce Young had a really good game today. I think he's looking good. I think the trajectory there is that the Panthers keep Bryce Young and hit other positions of need, and maybe shore it up with maybe a better veteran backup, and potentially next year, if it doesn't work out, then go after the quarterback. I think they give Bryce one more chance. Gosh, I'd love to see the Saints move on from Carr. Carr makes some incredible throws, but I just don't think they win with Carr. And like you said before, Stafford's getting older. It'd be nice to see the Rams shore that up. I don't think the Colts do anything, and I don't think the Steelers do anything really in the draft, unless they're going to find the safety valve kind of in the later rounds at quarterback to maybe step in if that's the case. But that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. No, I think so too. And we're looking at the free agent market. I think Sam Darnold is one of those guys, like what he does in Minnesota, how he kind of plays out. I don't know if Minnesota brings him back. I really don't. Like, I don't know if they're gonna look at it and say, hey, if he wins a couple playoff games, they'll bring him back on like a 2-year deal, or he's gonna go out there and get Baker money. And I don't think Minnesota's gonna pay him Baker money, the $100 million, $50 million guaranteed. The team that really stands out to me with Darnold is the Titans. Like that to me is like the big, like, hey, he's gonna go to the Titans. That offense coordinator there, or excuse me, the head coach there, coming from the Bengals, looking at like what he's been able to do with quarterbacks. Like he might look at Darnold being that placeholder for them. And then obviously like Justin Fields is probably going to find a role somewhere. So like those guys are still out there. But outside of that, Jameis, Flacco, Mac Jones, like we're talking very, very like yuck out there on the quarterback market. And then speaking of quarterbacks in the class, so here's the landing spots. In the mock, this is what happened. Cam Ward went round 1 to the Giants, and in the other round 1 quarterback was Shador Sanders to the Las Vegas Raiders. Jalen Milroe at round 2 with the Cleveland Browns. Garrett Nussmeier, Seattle Seahawks round 3. Carson Beck round 4, San Francisco 49ers. And then Quinn Ewers round 5, Tennessee Titans. Now, with every mock, these things are going to be all different, especially with PFF and when you're kind of going through there, trying to make it as realistic as possible too. But only 2 first-round quarterbacks. And in a second-round quarterback that is very highly rated at PFF, they have him like as a top 20 asset, but a guy that might not even come out. Jalen Monroe might go back to Alabama, might find a new home somewhere else. It's not a guarantee that he's going there. So what's your takeaway on these landing spots for these guys?
Yeah, obviously the 2 spots where we had the biggest needs are probably the 2 quarterbacks that are rated the highest in most people's models, or most people's drafts right now. So I that kind of tracks. That kind of makes sense. Cam Ward, they might be cleaning house up for the New York Giants here. So we don't know exactly what the infrastructure is going to look like, who the coach is, who the front office is going to be, but he gets to play with Malik Neighbors. That's not terrible. One of the better young wide receivers in the NFL. So that's a definite positive. And Sanders, I echo the same sentiment to maybe even more of an extent. They get to play with Brock Bowers, which is nice. That's really nice. But no wide receiver 1. Jacoby Myers is there, but no wide receiver 1 there, and no running back. And so, it'd probably be difficult situations for both of these guys, but at least they got the safety net there, the QB safety net on both situations. I like that a lot. Milroe on the Browns is interesting, especially if they're going to go let Jameis Winston play another year and let Milroe sit. Milroe's a really interesting test case, but I'm not sure how great of a quarterback he is. He's definitely a Konami code guy. He will definitely run the ball quite a bit, and it'll be really interesting if he gets start there. So I'm not sure exactly how that plays out over time, but in general, the way I look at it, I usually try and avoid everybody but first round quarterbacks. So Jalen Milroe in the second round is something that I probably would not be that interested in, but a longer term it could play out. Nuss, I think, should go back. I just updated my model, and Nuss and Carson Beck are really low after this year's numbers and putting all the data. So I think Nussmeier should go back, although he's still ranked pretty highly in Brugler's rankings and stuff like that. So there's definitely some desire out there, some people that are interested in him, but I think he probably should go back, and I'm not that interested in Carson Beck either as well. And then Ewers to the Titans is pretty interesting. If that's all they do, if they're going to roll with Levis and then have Ewers in the 5th round as a low cost backup, man, that's interesting, because I think eventually Ewers could take the job from Levis over time if that's the case. And you get, was Dak Prescott was a 5th, Russell Wilson was a 5th. Fourth. You get one of those situations where the guy just comes in and he beats out the starter over time. And I think that over the long term, that's probably the case. It probably take a while. His stock will probably fall because he goes all the way in the 5th round if that really is the case. But it's interesting. And you know what's also interesting, through this mock draft, the Titans did some interesting stuff. So we'll see
they did.
who they select at running back and wide receiver here, or no, I'm sorry, tight end and wide receiver here, and this might be actually a decent landing spot for being in the Titans in this situation for a quarterback.
Yeah, they did. We're going to talk about it. We'll get into it when we go through the mock, but they did. The Titans got better. Like, I don't know, when you're looking at the list, they're like, damn, they drafted these guys. So I agree with you too. I think those last 3 guys are probably going to go back to school, maybe last 4. And that's where it gets into the quarterback class as a whole.
Yeah, my one more comment is if Drew Aller comes out in this class, which we're not sure yet if he's going to come out. I think lately we've been trending to he probably goes back to school, gets some more experience, and hopefully is the number 1 pick next year. But there's some interesting quarterbacks next year. Well, but if Drew Aller is to come out in this year, let's say they go on a run and people get excited about Drew Aller, I think he's QB1. That's the way he will line up in my work. He'll be QB1 from the data perspective. And that, I think if that's the case, if he does decide to come out, I think there'll be the pressure of putting another QB in that first round. And I like to see it be him. And so we'll see if that's the case. If one of these guys, the New York Giants or Raiders, ends up selecting Drew Aller, I'm going to be much higher on that scenario than or if Drew Aller goes to even better team than those 2 teams, I'll be even more excited about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And I think with Drew Aller too, he could look at this class and being like, man, I can go make some money. Like if those 2 guys are the top guys and like there's a lot of question marks at the top, why do I want to wait for Arch Manning and some of these other guys if they decide to come out? Why don't I just go now? I think he's all going to come down to the Big Ten championship game. I think he's going to come down to the playoff, how he performs. But if he does well and he gets that momentum, the big mo is real. Like when you talk about draft circles and that draft capital, that could be something that's in there. Now we're looking at the running back. So going through kind of what we see from there and kind of, overall teams to avoid. Yeah. Lions, Colts, Dolphins, Jets, Falcons, Eagles, Rams, Seahawks. I will say this. Dolphins, if you draft another damn running back, I'm going to lose my ever-loving mind. Like, leave our running backs alone. We want them there. Now, some teams with no clear running back, the Chargers for sure. Raiders, yes. Raiders a big spot for me. Titans, Cowboys. I mean, Titans is one of those things, with Pollard and Spears there, depending on what they end up doing with that team. Vikings, are they bringing Aaron Jones back? Broncos, what are they doing there? Bears, Bengals, Giants, Commanders, Patriots, Steelers. I mean, Commanders have a lot of these guys in this range. What we put in here is they have committees. I mean, Brian Robinson is there, but do they add to it? Patriots, Ramondre hasn't looked great. They've had Gibson there getting touches there. Giants, Tyron Tracy's been fine, but it's a 5th-round pick. Maybe they invest again, right? Teams with older guys, Ravens, Browns, Texans, Saints, 49ers. Teams that are maybes, the Bills, Jags, and Chiefs and Bucks. I think the big ones probably stand out. The ones you want someone to go to, Cowboys, Raiders, Vikings, Broncos, right? We agree there?
100%. Yep. That's the top of the list.
I mean, that's the top of the list. I mean, when you go through here, and obviously with the committees and what we're seeing with like Bucky Irving, who went with Rachaad White, and now Bucky looks like he's going to be kind of their main guy. Like, so there is opportunity for these guys, but I would say like those guys at the top, especially the teams to avoid. If you see a running back get drafted there, if you're worried about landing spot, that's definitely those are teams to worry about.
Yeah, I would agree. And you echo Dolphins, I echo Jets. Stop drafting. Yeah, stop drafting running backs. Jets, please, please, please. But yeah, Cowboys, Raiders, Vikings, Broncos, very interesting. Chargers, if J.K. Dobbins doesn't come back. Bengals to pair with Chase Brown might be interesting. Giants, if you don't think Tyrone Tracy is the guy, And we talked about Patriots and Steelers. If the Steelers move on from one or two of those guys, the Steelers is a really interesting spot too. So I like all those spots. I just hope that we don't get a ton of players drafted to those teams that already have the really good dynasty running backs. And potentially, you never know what happens with free agency or any of that stuff. But you have an older class, an older regime of running backs in Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey. If there's any movement there, those are interesting spaces too.
And I think with Najee, the one thing with Najee Harris that you have to know, I think he's going to set the market for running backs. I think he has a chance to. I think that because when you look at the running backs out there for free agent wise, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, like you mentioned, Dobbins if he comes back, James Conner just got re-signed, so he's off the market. Javonte Williams, those are the top guys and running backs. So unless someone gets cut and they move on, I mean, Najee Harris might set the market at the running back. Just this free agency period, not like overall.
the best move for them, let him walk and then draft a guy in the
Yeah.
third round. You can get a great running back in
Hmm.
the third round. That
And a
that would
pair with
be
Warren. They need to
yeah.
do that. They're not giving him 12 million a year. They're probably not giving him 8 million a year, and I think he'll get that on the open market. Now, as far as what running backs got drafted, there's a lot of them. So if you listen on the podcast, I'm not going through every single one that got drafted, but I will go to the day 1 and day 2 guys. Ashton Jeanty, round 1 to the Bengals, which I think is kind of interesting there when you're looking at overall. Then Omarion Hampton, round 1 to the Baltimore Ravens, which I thought was a great pick, man. I loved it when it popped up there because I thought it'd be a little bit tougher for us to kind of go through. Quinshon Judkins, round 2 to New England Patriots. Travion Henderson, round 2 to the Broncos. Ollie Gordon, Pittsburgh Steelers. DJ Giddens to the Las Vegas Raiders in the 3rd round. And then Kyle McGonaghy from Rutgers, round 3 to the Green Bay Packers. There's some other guys thrown in there. We're going to draft a couple of them. We'll talk about them there. But overall, with these landing spots, anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I feel bad for Chase Brown shareholders because Genty is going to be the guy there. I think if that's the
Yeah.
case, I really like the situation there as well, being on a plus offense with Joe Burrow and the weapons they have there. It really opens up for the running back to be able to take over as well. Yeah, like Hampton's a nice spot, it's really cool to see 2 first round running backs. I don't know if this happens, but
No.
if this happens, that would be great. We get that second first round running back. It rarely happens that you get not rarely. It rarely happens that you get more than one first round running backs these days. So if we're getting 2, that's great. And the situation with Derrick Henry's going to be the guy until he isn't. So if he's there next year, he's still be the guy, and Hampton will be the heir apparent. You remember how long Derrick Henry sat on the bench waiting to be the guy behind. I can't remember whoever the starter was there at the time, but it felt like years. And then all of a sudden, Henry took over, and it was awesome from there. Judkins I kind of feel like this is a nice landing spot with the Patriots. I'm not. I kind of like Stevenson, but I think he's more of like a complimentary at this point. I think Judkins is a lot better than Stevenson, so I kind of like that landing spot, and I like playing with Drake May in general. And Travion Henderson, I think that's a really great landing spot, especially if Javonte Williams moves on. I think a lot of people are mocking, wide receivers and running backs to Denver.
Yeah.
And with the resurgence or what we saw from Bo Nix so far this season, it might not be a terrible landing spot. They drafted Audric Estime, but I think Travion Henderson plus Audric Estime from last year, I think actually that's a pretty good backfield. So it could be really interesting. Lots of other running backs in here. Ollie Gordon to the Steelers, DJ Giddens to the Raiders. So those are interesting depending on how the situation is. Giddens probably lands in one of the better running backs landing spots, and that's one of my takeaways here. We talked about where we wanted running backs to go early, which was Cowboys, Raiders, Vikings, Broncos, and we really just had the Raiders and the Broncos for day 2 picks. The Cowboys and Vikings didn't select any running backs in this draft, and Cowboys didn't select a running back until I believe the 6th round. So that's my takeaway from the landing spots. We didn't those main areas that we really wanted to see running backs go to. It was really just the Raiders and the Broncos that ended up selecting those picks. And Raiders was Giddens, and Broncos was Trey Henderson.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, we have seen that though. Like Dallas has skipped out on running backs multiple times, right? Like I don't know if they do that again after the disastrous season that we're seeing. But maybe they go out there in free agency and grab one of these guys. So yeah, I do think so too. It's fun. We're gonna mock it up here in a little bit, and we'll talk about kind of where our favorite spots were based on that. And I want to get to that, so we'll leave that for that. But there are some fun 4th, 5th, and 6th rounders here, like Taj Brooks to the Jets. I thought that was a fun pick. So some of these guys are going back though, like Jonah Coleman from Washington went to the Bills. He might be going back. So there's guys too. When we're talking about guys coming back, we haven't gotten there yet. All right, let's jump over to wide receivers. So when we're looking at wide receivers here, there's a lot of teams with needs out there for the wide receiver position. Wide receiver 1, Browns, Broncos, Chargers, Raiders, Patriots, Titans, Panthers, Saints. That's a lot. A lot of the haters might not like the Saints being on there, but I don't know what's going on with Olave. Like, just based on, if he's coming back, there's a lot of things going on there. His brother's tweeting out things, talking about the staff car, all these things. Like, there's a lot of change going to happen there. Need a wide receiver too, for sure. The Steelers, Cowboys, yes. I mean, Brandon Cooks is fine, but they really need that 2 guy with CeeDee Lamb. Commanders too. I think they're a sneaky play for some of these free agents out there. The Bills, team needs to, like the Cardinals, Falcons, really a lot of people. Ravens, Deontay Johnson played 0 snaps today. That's ridiculous. Deontay's going to be a free agent anyway, so they're moving on from that. Like, and I believe Bateman hurt his knee. If that's long term, now what are they going to look at there? Bengals, are they going to lose T. Higgins? Lions, Texans, they lost Diggs this year. The Dolphins are interesting with Tyreek. What are they doing there? Their cap's a mess, though, so I don't know how they're going to navigate that. 49ers, Ayuk coming off that injury. Debo's getting older, and Debo really looks like a shell of himself. Like, if we're being honest, just like that's wear and tear that he's had. Free agents to monitor. T. Higgins is out there. That's probably the number one. I mean, Jay salivates over T. Higgins being a wide receiver 1 somewhere else. Every pod, he talks about it there. Godwin is out there, probably going back to the Buccaneers, but, he's still out there too. Amari Cooper possibly hasn't really played a ton with his wrist at Buffalo. Diggs is still out there. Hopkins, Deontay, Slayton, Allen, Demarcus Robinson, Josh Palmer are probably your top guys. There's some guys probably going to get moved on or cut or whatever. But overall, when you look at the spots, nothing screams to me. They have to improve. A lot of these teams that need a wide receiver 1, they got to improve the quarterback position before I'm like, yeah, I'm in. Like that's like a landing spot there. That's what really my first takeaway goes with the wide receiver 1 needs.
Except the Patriots. The Patriots is my number 1 landing spot. If you get a true alpha in the Patriots with Drake May, that would be just phenomenal.
Can't wait to see them go tackle in the first round and then not get T. Higgins. Like, that's what's going to happen. Watch.
But if they get Tet McMillan with Drake May, that would be, I'm obsessed with that. If that happens, I'll be super excited.
Yeah.
The Chargers is an interesting one. I think they probably go tight end to fill their pass catcher realm. So I think that would probably be my guess, is they go early tight end and then hope that fills that pass catching. Because I don't know if they're ready to move on from Quentin Johnston. He's had, some okay games there, but obviously Ladd McConkey has hit. So
yes.
If you could get that like nice outside wide receiver, if Quentin Johnston isn't it, if they could get somebody there to pair with Justin Herbert, those are the situations where you got the great quarterback. Maybe Bo Nix for the Broncos is serviceable and can put up, can support a wide receiver 1 type of guy. But the other situations, definitely they need the QB change there, and they're at the bottom. They're up early in the draft because they're not great teams, not great quarterbacks, so they're kind of in this situation. And like these need a wide receiver 2 situations are pretty interesting as well. Like, who do you pair with CeeDee Lamb? I think like the wide receiver 2 in Dallas's offense could be really great for fantasy if they got somebody that was really good there. And it probably helps open up the offense a bit too. So I think that's an interesting, and clearly the Commanders and Bills would be great spots just from a QB perspective as well. So there's a lot of, I think when I go through and do those mock drafts and you look at team needs, is basically as you go down the board, every single team needs a wide receiver. It might not be their top need, but every single team could use a wide receiver to either beef up their depth or some teams just really need it really bad and need that, that number 1 wide receiver.
There's a difference, I think, between like a team like the Raiders. I mean, they have Bowers, so he's kind of their wide receiver 1. But like, hey, we need somebody else to be in there. Like the Patriots, just glaring need, a glaring need there at that position. Even, the Panthers, they've missed on a ton of wide receivers, man. Like they just have missed and missed and missed. And that's a big problem. If you're going to stick with Bryce, like we talked about earlier in the episode, you got to get him help. Like he needs help out here. He's, his best receiver right now is Adam Thielen, and off the injury coming back. I mean, I like Adam Thielen, but an over 30-year-old receiver should not be your wide receiver 1. And so they really got to kind of go there. Now, as far as like the class in itself, like we've talked about the class a little bit, and when you're looking at landing spots here, and again, there's a lot of them. So I'm just going to go through round 1 and round 2, and then I'm going to just stop it there. But Travis Hunter, Jacksonville is round 1. So these are all round 1 guys here. Ted McMillan going to Tennessee. Luther Burden going to the Saints. Isaiah Bond going to the Texans. Emeka Ibuka, going to the Falcons. Alec Amainer going to the Vikings, the Stanford wide receiver. Then in round 2, Xavier Restrepo going to the Cardinals. Kyron Lacy going to the Ravens. And then I'll just do round 3 real quick. Trey Harris, the Kansas City Chiefs. Evan Stewart to the Jets. Jalen Royals to the Browns. Torrey Horton to the Broncos. So a lot of names many might not know about on that list. There's some probably that aren't on the list that I would definitely probably have on this list here.
Yes.
There's some guys not there that we put in our rankings. We've talked about before that just haven't gone in the simulator yet in terms of the mock draft simulator there. But overall, if we had to stick, I think we should let's just stick with the first round. Let's stick with the first round guys. Anything stand out to you with the first round guys?
Yeah, well, so Hunter is going to be a really interesting case study for fantasy football because he's going to get potentially drafted in the top 5, probably the first overall pick. And if that's the case, when they're up there and they're announcing, are they going to announce him as Travis Hunter, cornerback, Jacksonville Jaguars, or are they going to say Travis Hunter, cornerback, wide receiver, Jacksonville Jaguars? Who knows how it'll turn out, but I think there'll be his value could shoot up or shoot down quite a bit depending on how the team that drafts him sees him as a player. The other thing I'd note for him, what is interesting take would be that if he does decide that he wants to play both ways, what I'd really love the situation for him to be nice quarterback, good quarterback. So we'll see how Trevor Lawrence shapes up. He had a pretty tough hit today, and how they move forward with him going forward. But if Travis Hunter ends up being the quarterback, if Trevor Lawrence ends up being the quarterback, and then you have a nice wide receiver 1 in the offense already, so the present pressure isn't for him. Maybe you feel the same way, maybe you don't, but the pressure isn't on him to be the wide receiver 1 and cornerback 1 each week. He can be the wide receiver, cornerback 1, and then be a wide receiver 2 for a team and still put up pretty good fantasy stats being that wide receiver 2, but doesn't have to be the guy that they go to in every moment. And I think that's the type of situation that I'd love to see him excel in if he's going to play cornerback and wide receiver, which I think he can in the NFL. So I think that's a really interesting situation. I think right now fantasy managers are like just shying away. They think, in my model, he's wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type range. But you just don't know if he's going to be primarily a cornerback in the NFL or a wide receiver. And that the range on him is going to be very, very interesting because we just haven't dealt with this before. So it'll be very new to see what it has. If he was just playing wide receiver and you had him as your wide receiver 4, he'd probably be locked in much higher in fantasy drafts than he is going right now because he plays both positions. Emeka Ibuka has always been really interesting to me. He lands with the Falcons. I think that's kind of an interesting spot for him. I think it helps Drake London. I think it probably hurts Kyle Pitts, but I think that offense could really use Emeka Ibuka. And I think it would probably, help it. The question is it Cousins or Penix Jr. next year? I'm not really sure, but that's interesting. My worst landing spot here is Elick to the Minnesota Vikings in round 1.
Yeah.
I didn't have Vikings as wide receiver need. I'm not sure he maybe deserves to be in the first round. He's probably a second round type guy as well. So least favorite landing spot in round 1 was probably him.
Yeah, that was a gosh, I wish I can go back and fix that because I can't see them taking a wide receiver in the first round. But hey, that's what happens. We've seen crazier things happen though. Like we have seen that. The two that stand out to me, Luther Burden to the Saints is fun. I think Lave Shaheed, you talked about that. This is the quarterback position though. It's like, hey, Carr, if it's Carr, how comfortable are we with that? Is Olave coming back? I think he fits pretty well in that. And then you talked about Ibuka. I think that's a good one. Restrepo though, going to the Cardinals is sneaky fun because I think he's better than Dortch, and him, McBride, and Marvin Harrison Jr. provide a very, very good offense, and I think that he can get a ton of targets. That was one of my favorite, underrated picks there when you're looking at overall just the wide receiver landscape and the landing spots here. Now, if we go to tight ends, we'll talk about them quick. We don't love tight ends on this show. I'm just kidding. We love tight ends, but overall, teams that need a tight end, Bengals, Broncos for sure. Like, again, Broncos need one. Colts, I think those two are like the big ones there. Chargers are pretty comfortable with Disley as a 12, personnel type guy, a blocker, but they need a pass catcher. The Jets, Titans, Rams, they definitely need one. Now, will the Chiefs move on? Dolphins, probably. Jonnu Smith is like a resurgence guy there. I don't know what they're going to do there. 49ers, they have a lot of needs. They might not look at tight end being as the one. I think Commanders are interesting because they have Senate there. Eagles, Jags. I think the Eagles are sneaky. Like, in our draft podcast, we talk about Randy took Tyler Warren in the first round last week when we did a mock. And I was like, damn, that's a good pick because, man, could you imagine the Eagles having Tyler Warren on that roster? Like, that would be a lot of fun there. So I do think that's kind of a need there. If you had to pick your favorite spot of like a team that needs a tight end, you want to see a tight end go there. Is it the Chargers, Colts, Broncos? Where are you leaning?
Well, probably the Chargers, just because of the quarterback situation there.
Okay.
I think that would be probably my favorite. Just pairing up the need with a good QB is probably is always going to be my favorite. So yeah, Chargers probably. And I do agree, Broncos and Colts are probably the guys that are going to draft the tight ends earlier. But I do think the Bengals would be a really interesting place as well. You get to play with Joe Burrow. If they move on from T. Higgins, it can be a good fantasy spot if that ends up being the case.
Yeah, no, 100%. And when you look at who got drafted, so not a ton. We'll go through them all. Colson Loveland went to Washington, the Commanders. So we mentioned them maybe possibly getting a guy. Tyler Warren went to Tennessee. So that's what Jay was saying, how they got Tennessee did some work. They got Tet and Tyler Warren there. Mason Taylor going to and I think Mason Taylor is one of my guys. I really like Mason Taylor from LSU. I think he's going back to school, but if he comes out, he went to the Atlanta Falcons. That's a terrible spot. Like, that hurt my soul when I saw that because to me, with Pitts there, I mean, that kind of makes you undraftable. Harold Fannin Jr., though, in round 3, the Bowling Green kid, he went to Los Angeles Chargers, and that just excited me a lot. Gunnar Helm going to Cowboys in round 4, that just screams Cowboys wasted round 4 pick. Aronde Gatson, Indianapolis Colts. Gatson's an interesting prospect because he's a tweener. But if he goes to the Colts, I think you have to kind of think about, hey, that's not a bad spot. And then Jake Briningstool from Clemson is another guy that's going to go probably day 2, day 3, probably day 3 that I like too. He went to the Carolina Panthers there. Overall, let's talk about the top 2 with Loveland and Warren. Which spot do you like better?
I'm going to defer to the better QB. I think Jane Daniels has proved himself already this year, and he kind of took off. It probably got a little exuberant there as him maybe being the best.
Dynasty QB1?
Yeah, exactly, QB1. Probably not that quick, but he is so good. He is really, really good, and the Commanders just like hit a home run here, and just fingers crossed he stays healthy because with this team, it's looking pretty good. So my favorite of the two is Colson Loveland, who's my favorite tight end in this group. A lot of people are kind of leaning towards Tyler Warren now. I still love Colson Loveland going to the situation with the best QB and Jaden Daniels. So I really do love that. I was a fan of Sinnott last year. I'm not sure how that situation has played out. I think Ertz has been the guy. Eventually he's got to go, and I'm not sure how Sinnott gets used. I know he's been at Kansas State. He was used as position wise more of like an H-back type of thing, so he could play a lot of different positions. And if Loveland is more of your slot wide receiver type catcher, pass catcher / tight end, I think that's a pretty interesting place for him to go. So I like that spot.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was fine. I think some of these spots are fine there. I think Loveland, too, I lean there. It just comes down to that quarterback. If it's Sam Darnold, I'm kind of in, right? If he's at Tennessee with Sam Darnold, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I can take that there. I think that's fun in terms of the landing spots that you saw. But I love me some Fannin Jr. to the Chargers. That would be, my gosh. Like, I'd have a lot of fun there. All right. And the last thing I was going to mention is for the tight ends. As far as like the best free agents out there, Mike Gesicki, he might go back to the Bengals. I don't know. Tyler Conklin, Jawan Johnson from the Saints. He made some noise a little bit, kind of that glue guy. Ertz is still out there. Bates, Kylan Granson, Austin Hooper. These are like the best ones. So like not a ton. Like you're going to see some guys get replenished here at the tight end market a little bit. Now, I will say I don't think the tight end class is as deep as everybody thinks it is. Like I do think that because I think Mason's going back. I don't know what some of these other guys are going to do. I think it's 3 guys right now, Loveland, Warren, and Fannin. And after that, there's a tier. Like, and so, and I know some guys like other guys, Terrence Ferguson, some other people out there. But I do think that from a fantasy perspective, those are the three you're really looking at there. But let's mock it up. Let's talk about it. Let's go through our mock and how we did it based on this. This is a 12-team Superflex mock, tight end premium, just a small premium. We like to throw in the premium for everybody because everybody kind of plays that premium in there. And so this is based on their landing spot. So at 101, we have Ted McMillan. He went to the Titans, as we said. 102 is Ashton Jeanty, the Bengals. We're going to be fighting over 101 and 102 for the rest of this offseason and where these guys are going to go. Then we have probably a tier at 103, Luther Burden for the Saints. 104 was our first quarterback. That was Shedeur Sanders to the Raiders. 105 is Cam Ward to the Giants. 106 was Quinshaw Judkins. He went to the Patriots in the second round. 107 was Emeka Egbuka going to the Falcons. 108 is Colston Loveland going to Washington. 109 is Amarian Hampton for the Ravens. 110 is Travion Henderson of the Broncos. 111 is Travis Hunter, the Jaguars. And then 112 is Tyler Warren. No big things that pop off like, oh my gosh, that happened there, just because of, this is pretty consensus right now in December. I see a ton of mocks, a lot of fantasy people doing mocks right now because it's hitting the algorithm. Everybody wants to talk about it. So I don't see a ton of differences here. I think the big thing, and we've mentioned this multiple times, so I don't want to say is it Tet versus Jeanty, because we've already had that conversation. But with these landing spots, if and I know where you're going to go because you hate the quarterback, or the quarterbacks aren't good. So if let's say that he has a serviceable quarterback. Let's say it's not Levis. So let's just get that. Let's say Darnold's there, or they draft a guy. If they draft a guy or have Darnold there, are you taking Ashton Jeanty first with the Bengals, or are you taking Tet?
I'm still taking Tet. Okay. I think Tet is. Here I just updated my Stein index model, and I have Tet McMillan and Ashton Jeanty as my two tier 1 prospects, with Luther Burden falling out of the tier 1. So I do think both of these guys have a decent shot of hitting in the NFL. So that's one thing I'll say. Tet, I see as if he hits, the situation is somewhat similar to what Malik Neighbors went through this year, where his QB is a question mark, but he still takes a majority of the offense away and consistently puts up fantasy points. And I think in that situation, he will be valued higher than Ashton Jeanty. Now, if Jeanty comes in for the Bengals and just goes off like he is doing in college and putting up 200 yards a game and 3 touchdowns, yeah, of course, that's going to be the one that you wish you would have owned. But if I'm playing the odds, I think I want to bet on the wide receiver, the positional advantage that you have from a value perspective on wide receivers, and then just Tet. In this situation, without having very much, with having a ton of opportunity there just to own that whole passing game in the Tennessee, I think the situation is similar to Malik Neighbors from last year.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, they've held their value too. So I agree there. And I do think there's a tier there. And then when we're talking about quarterbacks, I mean, Shedeur went first. So at the 104, and I don't remember, did I make that pick or did you make that pick? I forget where we were at on the.
You took Shedeur. I was 1, 3, 5. Yeah, okay. Odds. I was odds.
All right. So when you're looking at that, this is why Jay's on here. He knows numbers and he can remember things because I cannot. I'm too old and I just can't remember it there. So I took Sanders first. And when you're looking at it, I think there's a question of who they're built around. So I think both are going to get a new coaching staff. So I think the Raiders moving on from Pierce, and I think that possibly the Giants move on from the ball, but it just doesn't look great. I just think that team, there's something going on there. Maybe they bring him back. But if they both move on from their coaching staffs, I'm more excited about Sanders if they have an offensive-minded coach that kind of build him there with the Las Vegas Raiders. They have Bowers. And Bowers is legitimate. And I want to say something, too, because I heard a lot of things like YouTube comments. We love you. Some of you, 99% of you. I appreciate you guys. You talk about landing spots and talent. And people, I saw someone last week said, well, people were saying not to draft Bowers because he went to the Raiders. We weren't saying that. I'm going to be very clear. We wrote a whole thing for the last company we worked at. I talked about draft Bowers because talent is that. So if I'm talking about landing spot dependent for any of these things, I'm drafting Tet and Jeanty no matter where they go. Outside of that, though, I don't see a person where I'm a player, I'll draft him no matter where he goes. Because these guys, Bowers was an elite level talent. Now, as far as landing spots goes for these guys for the quarterback position, I love the fact Sanders and Bowers could be together. I mean, that's a great pairing. And I think that gives Sanders a perfect outlet, a guy to target there. Myers is there well, and Myers is fine. Myers is a fine wide receiver too. And if they do add to that room from a wide receiver perspective, they go get somebody, that would be a fun spot. Now, on Ward's side, he's got neighbors, Wandale, Tyrone. He's got guys there. Theo's out for the year, but he does have guys there as well. This just really comes down to like a coaching staff, like who's that coach there? What does that look like? Because I'd be worried that if Ward goes to the Giants, okay, now they have a year. Maybe DeBall's back, but then they don't do very well. Maybe they're going to fire him. Now we're in that Caleb Williams situation where, hey, so if it's a new coaching staff, they take Shador. They have a plan for Shador there. They have Brock Bowers. It seems like Shador kind of wants to go to the Las Vegas Raiders, which matters for him too. And then I get this question with Cam and Shador all the time, and I don't think either are great prospects in terms of like perfect prospects. They all have things to work on. I just think Shador is going to be a better pro right now. Like if I looked at it right now based on decision making, I think Cam is fine, but that's why I lean Shador over Cam.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think they're 50-50. Right now I have them bracketed and kind of in the same tier. And it'd be really fascinating to see how the NFL GMs come in, and if there's any from Shador Sanders' side, a Deion Sanders side, any directives or which my son won't play for this team or something like that. But that should be interesting to see how that all shapes up and plays. Probably the Raiders is probably a fine situation for him. They'd probably be okay with that. So I think that but what I would say, like you mentioned, is yes, these are the two open spots. We get probably the better two QBs, assuming Drew Aller's not in here. But I would say is these are not tier one type QBs.
No.
That we've seen. So we've gotten 2 or 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 1 QBs in the last like 5 or 6 drafts. In this draft, I don't think we have those tier 1 QBs in this draft. And people are going to like Shador Sanders and people are going to like Cam Ward, but that's somewhat akin to kind of liking the lower tier quarterbacks that we've seen that go in the first round in the past. So I don't think these are guys on the same level as what we saw in Jaden Daniels last year, what we saw from JJ McCarthy last year. And those were my tier 2 guys. I don't think those guys are there. So, from a QB perspective, sure, pick which one you want. But if I was doing it, I probably, this is super flex. I probably honestly be avoiding these QBs or trading down to get more capital or stuff like that. I mean, clearly team construction wise, if you need a QB, you need a starting QB, you're going to probably want one of these guys. I get that. But if you don't need the QB and you can trade down a few spots to the back half and pick up extra capital along the way, that's kind of how I see playing this draft.
Yeah, no, 100%. If you can move back, you move back, you get those assets, and you don't question it. But we always got to talk about quarterbacks though. Like that's just they love talking quarterbacks. And again, it comes down to Bowers versus Neighbors, and I love Neighbors, but I don't know. I think what works better from like a developmental standpoint. Like we've seen Bowers really do that for a quarterback this year. He's made AOC look okay, and O'Connell. And I think that if they get a new coaching staff, I would lean with the Raiders. Now, if they roll it back with Pierce, I'd probably flip it. To be honest with you, if the ball's there, and they do it, then yeah, that's kind of how I look at that, just to kind of talk about it. Outside of the quarterbacks, Ted Genti, you've talked about him a little bit already. I don't know if you want to lean there or go somewhere else. What is your other favorite kind of landing spot for one of these guys?
I like Loveland. I like Travion Henderson. We've mentioned both of those. Travis Hunter is interesting because you have Brian Thomas Jr. and a decent QB. I like that. And if Derrick Henry's not in Baltimore, Omar and Hampton there is an incredible landing spot. So they're just interesting landing spots. There's no perfect ones, I don't think, but probably my favorite's the Loveland to Washington if that really is how it works out.
You don't think there's any perfect landing spots in this bad boy?
Not that when we ran through them, the quarterbacks, I wouldn't call any of them really perfect.
No.
If let's say the Cowboys took Ashton Genti, let's just say that's the case. That would be maybe a perfect one or something like that. Not saying that they should or that's what will happen, but you have the prospect absolutely meet up with the team's direct need.
Yeah.
And their situation seems to be fairly perfect. That I don't know if we had any of those in this one.
I like, Emek is interesting at 107 going that high with the Atlanta Falcons, with Pitts being there, with Darnell Mooney being there. And I don't know if they're going to take a round one wide receiver, excuse me. So I think that was a big question mark I had in this one. I do think I really like Amari Hampton going to Baltimore. Like, and even if he sits behind Derrick Henry for another year or whatever that looks like, that's a great spot. But then we're back into that, like, Trey Benson sitting behind James Conner, Jonathan Brooks sitting behind Chuba Hubbard. Like, we're back into that conversation, which we hate, but I think that's what we get from the running back spot. But this is a clear, like, even with the landing spots, there's a tier after 102. Like, that is where that tier is at right now. And in this, I would say, I like all those players. I think I messed up because I think I went on a pod, or I was talking to some people about it, and I said, if Travis Hunter's on the board at 109, he's not getting past me. And he got past me, but I couldn't. But I couldn't pass up Travion with the Broncos either. Running back position, Travion going round 2 to the Broncos. Man, I would smash that all day, right? Because you don't know what Travis Hunter's packages are going to look like. Like, you don't know, like, if he's going to be out there more than that. So, like, I do think that's where a scenario where I could see myself taking maybe someone else besides Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's go to round 2. Let's talk about it, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Again, we're talking kind of landscape, and then kind of just going through a quick mock, just where we at with these guys. Now, in the second round, 201, Isaiah Bond going round 1 to Houston Texans. We didn't really mention him earlier. Harold Fannin Jr. going to the Chargers at 202. Ollie Gordon a second. He went to Pittsburgh in the round 3rd, so he's at 203. 204 is Evan Stewart, who I think is going back to school, but he came out. He went round 3 to the Jets, possibly being their wide receiver 2 if they move on from Devonta Adams. 205, Alec Aomanor from the Stanford Cardinals. He went to Minnesota Vikings round 1. We mentioned him. 206, Xavier Westropo from the Cardinals. 207, DJ Giddens from the Raiders, round 3. That's a smash pick. DJ Giddens is a Raider, man. Like, he is to a T what the Raiders look for. And I even mentioned him on a recent pod talking about, like, hey, Raiders are going to like this kid. Like, they're going to look at this kid and be like, hey, he could be possibly a 3-down guy. Nick Singleton at 208. He went round 4 to the Jaguars. Not a great spot for Singleton if he decides to come out. 209 is Kyron Lacey going to the Ravens, and maybe the Ravens are in the market for another wide receiver based on kind of what we're seeing. Trey Harris from Ole Miss. He went to the Kansas City Chiefs because they just can't stop taking wide receivers out there. And then you look at Caleb Johnson, who just came out. He just declared as we're recording this. And, he's going out to the NFL. He did not get drafted round 5. Reason why is because in the simulator, he is not ranked very high according to PFF. So Jay was very upset that he did not get drafted. So he drafted him to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not a great spot, but he wants to talk about him because he loves Caleb Johnson there. And then I took the second round here at 212, Jalen Moreau from the Cleveland Browns, just based on upside, rushing standpoint, and then also, like, hey, he has a shot there. Like, if they roll it back with the same quarterbacks, if Jameis moves on, it's just Deshaun. Like, that could be that's a Jalen Hurts type situation there, if that's the case. But overall, any takeaways from round 2? You got the board. You can go anywhere you want.
Yeah. So, well, I'll just explain sort of what I was doing here in this case. I mean, usually in my model, the way I like to look at it is quarterbacks round 1, and then running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends round 1, 2, or 3. So day 2 or better. And as you can see, I just was picking off these guys that went in round 1, 2, or 3. I got a lot of round 1ers in the second round, which is pretty interesting. So, like, Isaiah Bond, for the Texans, the assumption is they move on from Diggs, and then you have Isaiah Bond, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell. Nico Collins is probably going to eat in that situation, and it might be tough for Bond and Dell to carve out their own pieces, but they get CJ Stroud to throw them the ball. And that's an interesting one to me. And you get a first round wide receiver at 2.01. That's pretty great. We didn't have a lot of those last year, so that's interesting. Elick Manor is another first round. Got him in at 2.05. Giddens, who probably got one of the better running back landing spots, 2.07, which is interesting. Now, I have him a little lower in my model, but just from a landing spot and draft capital perspective, that's a really good landing spot. And Kyron Lacey, round 2 guy, got him at 2.09 again. And then finally, I'll just mention Caleb Johnson. This was picked before the Bucky Irving go off game that happened today. But what my perspective on this was, Caleb Johnson's not going to the 5th round. Like Kevin said, he just declared. I think he'll be a day 2 or better type running back. I really would prefer not this situation, but if Rachaad White moves on and it's Caleb and Bucky together, I think it makes a really interesting combination, especially for actual NFL football, not necessarily fantasy football, but NFL football. That would be a really, really interesting combination that they'd have. They'd have that backfield locked up for a really long time and have one of the better backfields if it was the case, if they could swing that. But I think Caleb Johnson's just an absolute fabulous prospect, and you see this every year. Sometimes, and this happens every year, sometimes you have good prospects, players that play well, that don't go in day 2. They just fall a little bit, and you just have to, put your foot down and say, this isn't right, and I'm going to kind of move away from my draft capital kind of themes there and go down and get a guy that maybe went day 3, just because I think he's probably going to, I think he has higher likelihood to hit based on, the metrics and the analytics that I look at from that perspective.
And I would argue, and I don't have the numbers in front of me because you know me and numbers, we get confused. But like, if you're going to use that strategy, you do it with running backs. Like, I know the Pukas are out there and I know those things, but like, we tried that with Troy Franklin. That has not worked out. Right.
Right.
So
maybe.
I mean, we're still holding on hope. We got
a little hope still.
We got some shares out there that we're holding on to. But I think some running backs, like, if you like their opportunity, they're running back 2 on the depth chart, and you want to go take a shot at them, that's fine. Like, I think that's perfectly fine there. And there's some spots in here. Like, if you're going over this, I think Ollie Gordon as Steelers is an interesting one. I'm not a huge Ollie Gordon person in terms of like what he is as a running back. He bounced back a little bit this year, but if they do move on from Najee Harris, like we mentioned, Jalen Warren's there for another year. That's a pretty good, like, he fits the Najee Harris role, right? Like he kind of fits that role for them. And that's not a bad kind of, as we're looking at it. Other guys that, didn't make the board, they got drafted. Jay Knott went to the Seahawks. Woody Marks is a player from USC that people should know. He went to the Browns in the 6th round. Dylan Sampson went to the 49ers. Devin Neal went to Kansas City. That would be, I think, a fun spot to draft Devin Neal at, like from a pass catching perspective. He's a Kansas running back out there. Jonah Coleman didn't get drafted by us. Jordan James went to Dallas. That's a good spot for a guy. And that could be another one that you draft late, like Caleb Johnson. And you're like, I really like that kid. I think that he should go there. And overall, I mean, I think, when there's some guys out there that didn't get drafted by us in these 2 rounds, that I think definitely could, in that 3rd round, some value there. Like there are, when you go into the running backs, if all of them come out, which is not going to happen, but there's some guys out there, you're like, man, if he's in here and he's in the 3rd round and he goes to running back 2 on a depth chart, I'll take a shot at him overall. But that's the deal. So any final thoughts on the mock or on the landscapes?
Yeah, this is mock draft. So fake draft based on fake landing spots. And we're so far away from May, the actual draft, that there, all these prospects are going to go through the full evaluation process. And then we find out their draft capital and we find out where they landed. And that's going to be so fun. But this is a fun exercise to just kind of see what will happen in certain situations, how this could play out. And what's funny is when you're sitting there watching the draft and you're hoping for a certain guy to go to a certain place and stuff, and it never happens. This is kind of how it looks like when you get these mock drafts, and you PFF or mock draft database or whatever you use spits it out, and you're like, oh man, that's terrible. I hate that, or I really don't like that, or that's a really good landing spot. It's always fun. It's always fun to look at it and analyze it from those perspectives. And that's what we're doing. We're just thinking about how these players could fit in certain situations and where the best landing spots would be. I hope you got that from this episode.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is just fun. And you're going to hear a lot of people like, the reason why we do this is for fun too, but also get you guys up to date on these guys, where they're at, like who these prospects are. Cause I know a lot of you guys don't follow college football because you don't have the time and you got families, you got crap to do. And this idea show, hey, here are kind of what's coming. I think for us, we always want to try to add a little bit of twist, right? So like, we know these podcasts are long on YouTube, but we appreciate you guys watching, kind of going over like, hey, what are the landscapes out there? What's coming next? What are the free agents also, right? Not just throwing a mock at you. just like, hey, here's a mock. Like, okay, now we have landing spots. Let's talk about the landscape now as we get into December. And we're always thankful for you guys watching us, listening to us, either on the podcast here on YouTube. Drop your comments, though. We love the discussion, like going over kind of what you see here. What are some of your favorite landing spots? Tell us in the comments. Like, what is a team that, like, I know Jay was shitting on all the landing spots, but what is a team you're like, yeah, I like that one. I think that one would be a good one. It would rise up my boards if he went there. And remember, too, talent-wise, like the two guys in the tier, Ashton Genty and Tet, to me are landing spot proof almost, kind of like how Brock was. The other ones, though, I think are going to need some work in terms of, okay, what is their role? What is that looking like? And then what's their capital as well? So appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back next week talking, I don't know what, but we'll be here talking to you guys. We haven't decided yet what we're going to get into. And I have to say this before we go. Go Blue!